everybody, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Steven.
And we are taking on a home. Today we are going to be talking about the pros and cons of renting. Stay tuned. Alright guys, like I said before, we are jumping into the pros and cons of renting. Now let's get started. Steven will be talking about the cons.
Yep.
And I will be talking about the pros. Who wants to go first?
You want to go first?
Sure. So obviously the first pro of renting is you are usually not going to be living with your parents any longer. So That's a big win. You know, you're getting out there, you're doing your thing now. So that's very, very exciting. But the real pro to renting is you are not usually in charge of maintenance repairs unless you cause them. So something with home ownership is a lot of times if your refrigerator breaks or your window is not eco-friendly anymore, you would need to pay that to get updated or get replaced. When you are renting, typically the rental property or the apartment building that you are in are responsible for that. Not always, but usually. So you can save some money that way. Another thing about renting is it can ultimately end up being cheaper depending on where you're located and how many bedrooms your unit is than buying.
Yep, exactly. And also, one thing about that for a pro is if you're only going to be there for a little bit, typically if you're going to buy a home, you're going to want to be there for at least 2 to 3 years. Now, by being there to 2 to 3 years, that amount of time is enough time for you to make enough payments on the home that not only you're going to be paying off your closing costs in that amount of time, you're going to start building equity in your home. So if you're only in a place for 2 to 3 years, you know, it might make more sense in the long run to rent just because you have more freedom and you can move on without typically losing money.
Another great reason to rent is if you're new to an area and you're not sure where you really ultimately want to end up being. It's a great way to kind of get a taste for a new city or even a city that you didn't grow up in before taking the time and resources to actually purchase a home. Another pro about renting is that you do not need a down payment. Typically, you will need some sort of security deposit or maybe, 2 months of rent up front, but the costs to that are much lower than the amount needed to put a down payment on a home.
Yep. Exactly.
So let's dive into some cons of renting.
Yeah. So one of the cons of renting is you're at the mercy sometimes of your landlord. Clearly, they have rules that they have to follow by giving you enough time to get the home ready and not being able just to surprise you whenever he wants. Typically, in most states, they have to give you at least a 24-hour notice. Some states are different, but in most states, at least 24 hours.
So they could stop in or kick you out at any time?
Not necessarily at any time, but close to it. Now, if you're owning a home, that necessarily won't happen. As long as you keep on making your payments, you can make the house look as much as you want, as good as you want, as bad as you want. If you're in a homeowners association, you have to follow their guidelines. But besides that, you can kind of have more creativity with your home and actually be able to do more with it. Yeah. So another con is a lot of times, if you're in a rental for more than a couple years, your rent could go up. So if you're renting for $1,200, a place downtown, it's nice and everything, and you planned on being there for longer, the landlord can raise the rent on you. He can also raise the rent enough that you might want to leave. So you are close to the mercy of the landlord sometimes. So it might be in your best interest to be an actual good renter.
So you're saying that mortgages will not increase amounts monthly in time the way that rent could?
So in mortgages, a lot of times when your mortgage increases, it's at your, as long as you're doing well, you're making payments and everything like that, and as it goes up with the market and the rates and everything. Now rent is more of a controlled thing where a landlord can raise it almost whenever he wants. It's kind of up to him.
What about animals with renting?
So a lot of times landlords, with their renters, landlords typically don't necessarily like animals. Now, outside of your own personal opinions, whether you're a dog or a cat person, a renter is borrowing the home from a landlord. They're borrowing that space. If your animal is not potty trained, that animal can cause a lot of damage that the homeowner, the landlord, is responsible for. So, if you're responsible for a pet or anything in the home, that can cause a mess A lot of times that can get you in trouble. Sometimes there's things called pet deposits, which could be up to $500 depending on where you are in the world. You could add to your rent a month just because you're a pet. Now, that's just there for the landlord's security, because they can do damage.
But there are lots of properties that do allow pets with an additional fee, some without additional fee, but we love our animals, so I know if I was renting, we'd have to be paying that fee.
No, absolutely. Some places also don't allow for certain animals come through. Unfortunately, a lot of times there are breed restrictions for dogs and size restrictions for cats as well. So take that into consideration.
So basically, if you are renting, you do not have a full free-for-all like you would if you were buying, but there are still good reasons to rent if you're not ready to buy a home.
Yep. A lot of times if you are renting for a couple years before you're looking to buy, a good way to build your credit and actually prove to a bank that you can make payments is paying your rent on time. Now, one way to go get a loan is you have to have something called a good payment history. Now, if you have a good payment history, you can use your on-time payments and actually show them to a bank that you can pay already $1,000, $1,100, $800, whatever your rent is a month, and you've paid it on time for the last year, 2 years, or so on. That's just one thing that you can do to hopefully get a loan, if not an even better loan than what they expected. Anything that shows that you can make consecutive payments on time will make your case even stronger.
So long-term renting does have benefits for going on to try and get a mortgage for a home.
Exactly. Sometimes it does. And if you want, it's another way that you can just kind of move around and you're not necessarily stuck to one spot.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for watching our pros and cons of renting. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I prefer buying homes.
Yes. Have you ever rented before?
I actually have not ever rented.
From what I've heard, a lot of people do prefer buying over renting. People I know who are renting regret the decision and they're still in their leases, so they can't yet buy. But I have never rented an apartment, but in college, of course, I lived on campus and used some student housing. But we currently own our home.
Yeah, and I've been a landlord for going on 6 years now with experience with all sorts of tenants. Everything from Section 8 to well-established tenants. And we have multiple properties, so I've kind of heard quite a bit of stories.
Well, again, thank you so much for watching, and we cannot wait to welcome you home.